Vic's Basement is brought to you by the Gaming Stadium. They are Canada's leader in online esports tournament facilitation, and they've got tournaments happening every single weekend that you don't want to miss out on. You can find out all about them at tgs.gg. Hey, welcome to my basement, everybody. Boy, have we got a treat for you, especially if you happen to be a Star Wars fan. And you know what? I know you are. We've got Sam Witwer in the house. You know him as Deacon St. John from Days Gone. He's Star Killer in The Force Unleashed. He's the voice of Darth Maul. And you've seen him in all kinds of cool shows like Being Human, Battlestar Galactica, The Walking Dead, Smallville, Supergirl, and many, many more. And we also have David W. Collins. You know him from hosting Star Wars events and red carpets all over the galaxy. He is an actor and a sound editor and a sound designer and much more. He played Proxy in The Force Unleashed, as well as being its audio lead. He worked on sound design for The Last of Us. He is the voice of Dad in Boss Baby, Back in Business. And along with Sam, he has voiced numerous Stormtroopers over the years. It is an honor to have you both in the basement. I've had you guys on the show before individually, but you're good friends, and I've wanted to do something with the two of you for a long time. And Bad Batch is that conduit. David, you worked on the show, and Sam, I know that you know everybody that's involved, and we all love the show. I saw you guys both tweeting about it, and I wanted to talk about it. I know that you guys, as well as being, true ambassadors for Star Wars, you're also giant fanboys for the Star Wars lore, as am I. So I thought we could nerd out for a little bit and talk about the Bad Batch. Sam, let me hear from you first, because your perspective was a bit different. You were so involved with the Clone Wars over the years, and you're friends with Dave Filoni and the crew assembling it. What was it like watching the Bad Batch?
Really unpleasant. Because I was like, this is missing Darth Maul, and it doesn't make any sense. No. Here's the feeling I got. I remember when Bad Batch started airing. After the first few episodes, I wrote David and I said, you know what I really love about the Bad Batch is that if I were to explain what's happening in this plot to 12-year-old me, 12-year-old me would go, I don't know what you're talking about. Clones and Commando and the politics between the Empire now and all this stuff. I would be interested, but there's nothing that would anchor me to the original 4, 5, and 6. So 12-year-old me would be lost, and I'm gleeful about that fact. You know what I mean? Right. I'm gleeful because it means we're in really interesting story material, which can go anywhere, that is based on mythology that has been built up recently. You know what I mean? Yeah. Through George Lucas's prequels and through the Clone Wars. And so I'm very excited. I'm very excited about learning about a new area of Star Wars that isn't any kind of retread of what we've seen before. I love that. Yeah, same. Except we have, tidbits about the Clone Wars or the clones mentioned in the original trilogy, and we don't know who the Stormtroopers are. I was thinking back to watching the original Star Wars and just being freaked out by the iconography, the imagery of those Stormtroopers, and wondering, are they robots? What's underneath their mask? And the fact that this show is starting to answer that in some creepy details and some creepy ways, it's incredible. And I'm sitting here going, because I said to David, another thing, we talk all the time. We're friends. I said to David, I said, listen, I have always been an advocate for Stormtroopers being clones. And then in Rebels, they're recruits, or at least some of them are recruits. And it's kind of ambiguous. And this show seems to be saying, no, they're recruits, but it's providing some really interesting story material, because the clones, it seems to me, and David, don't give away any spoilers, but with Hauser and stuff, it seems that if your army is used to working with the Jedi and you're the Empire, maybe that's not the army for you. The Hauser thing was interesting. I was like, this is a guy who did Order 66, but he's not okay with what's happening, I don't know. So what Star Wars is now turning me around. I always wanted the Stormtroopers to be clones. I thought, but now, and I think that was George Lucas's original idea, but it's hard to say. He's gone back and forth on it. And so now that they're providing some really interesting story material about like what's happening to the clones and are they being phased out, I'm now completely on board with whichever way it goes. Are the Stormtroopers of the original trilogy recruits? are they Sparty clones from Mount Tantus? You know, like, I don't know. I have no idea. And I can't wait to find out. But dude, what I just said is a bunch of gobbledygook. You know what I mean? And that's what I kind of love. It isn't like
it's new lore. It's new mythology.
It's new mythology. Like it's, I would be lost. 12-year-old me, who was a Star Wars expert, would be utterly lost with what I just said. You know,
that's awesome. David, how did the work come to you? Did you get like a big stack of the whole season scripts right out of the gate, and you were completely spoiled, or did you? Was it parsed out a little bit? How was it working on the show for you?
This might surprise people, but this goes back to Star Wars Resistance, which is a show that I did for 2 seasons as well, and the same was true on Bad Batch as it was on Resistance, which is when they're completely done with the visuals and episode, they turn it over to Skywalker Sound. So I receive it, and it's got, you know, the dialogue in it, and it's got some tempo, like guide tracks in it. You know, this is what we're probably going to do with the music. This is kind of what we're thinking, you know, effects wise, it will be quiet here and loud here, whatever. And that's the first time I see it. And, you know, and in fact, I have meetings with the director, Brad Rao, and he says, I apologize for having to spoil this for you, but you need to know that in this episode, there's going to be this really weird thing. And he'll describe, I'm so sorry to spoil it for you, but, you know, there's just like, he's really, you know, he doesn't want to ruin the surprise, which I think is just kind of a delightful,
it's wonderful,
you know, sign of the type of people that I'm working with. You know, they're so invested and they want me to have a gut reaction to it. I suppose it's a similar method that John Williams has. He doesn't read a script. He reacts to the raw visual and the footage and the edit, because the edit really does, you know, how something's edited together, how it's shot, how it's lit, really does inform how you do sound design or sound editing for it, and music composition as well. I'm not the composer. It's the Kiner brothers. Kevin Kiner is just incredible. But I react to it in its raw form for the first time. And then I kind of get a map of where it's going, just so I can start thinking about certain episodes that are going to have big sound. Like, okay, you need to start thinking about this, you know, so you can start thinking about what you're going to design, what resources and materials you're going to gather. And then other than that, it's just, here it is, and we'll see you when you're done at the mix, and you know, and we'll give you notes and we'll jam on it together. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Dude, you were at LucasArts for a long time, and you worked on Republic Commando, and there are echoes of Republic Commando all the way through this season, and you're bringing back sounds and voices. And talk to me about the connections between the Bad Batch and Republic Commando.
Yeah, you know, the voices are all D. Bradley Baker, who is insanely good. As if we had any doubt, this is just kind of, I think, his show of force, the ultimate.
I mean, flex,
Emmy
for this, right? Like, honestly, if this, it's like,
you got to do it. I mean, it's not just the Bad Batch. I mean, there are episodes like the first episode. He's an entire cafeteria of these guys in the first episode. You know, it's not just the Batch; it's the Batch and everyone else. You know, that he's doing, you know. I did a little work to kind of help, you know, with the different helmet futzes and things like that, and some positioning, but it's all him, you know. But in terms of sounds in Republic Commando, this goes all the way back to February of 2020. I was doing a show for the Star Wars YouTube channel, the Star Wars Kids channel, called Galaxy of Adventures, and I was up in Matt Wood's office. He's my boss, and he's like, yeah, there's this new series coming down. And he showed me that opening scene from 101 with Aftermath, where, you know, the Bad Batch rolls the snowball and boulder downhill and takes out all the battle droids. And I hosted a panel in 2015 with Dave Filoni about the animatics that weren't completed of the Bad Batch arc that eventually happened in season 7 of the Clone Wars. And back then I was like, well, this is George's kind of continuation of that Special Elite Forces idea of Republic Commando, because George Lucas really was the one that told us at the end of Republic Commando to make them all have very different personalities, different voices. Wow. He even suggested we contact Robin Williams and try and get him to play one of the funny clones. You know, that was all George. So when I saw the Bad Batch, I thought,
Scorch, by the way, Scorch. He suggested that, like, let's just be, because the audience is going to be like, one of the funny clones.
Well, he wasn't called Scorch yet. That came later. It was just, hey, we have a bunch of clones. And, you know, you should have one that's like funny, and you should have one that's, more bloodthirsty, or one that's, more nerdy, or whatever,
So he was,
and that
really,
was all George Lucas.
That's amazing. So he was really, and Filoni were really trying to humanize these creations, these characters.
Well, this was,
I don't have much insight into the Bad Batch in terms of how that came about.
Yeah.
I mean, they were breaking so many stories in the Clone Wars. I was just reacting to it, in a raw form in 2015, that it reminded me of something that I worked on for 2 years. This very passionate game that we were all very passionate about, called Republic Commando.
Yeah.
And so it just felt like in my wheelhouse. I'd spent so many little years of my life thinking about how to do sound for this. And so I pitched Matt. I said, I really want to do this series, and he said, okay. Cause I'd done Resistance and I'd done a couple of other things. And so I was assigned to the series, and I just threw myself at it because I was so in love with the concept. And to echo what Sam said, no pun intended, with echo there. But to echo what
there's a literal pun in every. There is no way. Now the Star Wars universe is so big, we can't say anything without it being a pun at this point.
Escape.
I know. But it is the time period is wide open with possibility. And when Republic Commando, when I first started, I mean, when Crosshair attaches this little wire trap to his sniper rifle to take out the Federation tanks in the very opening scene of the Bad Batch, I used the very first sound I ever made for Republic Commando, which is a weapon pickup sound that I did.
That's awesome.
For our first milestone, just as kind of like a circle is now complete moment for me. But
yeah,
it sounds naive. I didn't think anybody would notice. But later on, and I didn't know this at the time, when Republic Commandos actually showed up, absolutely, I brought out the DC-17 sounds, and I brought out a lot of the UI sounds. And then there was one shot, this must have been in, it wasn't Battle Scars, I think it was Reunion, where Cad Bane takes out Hunter, and Hunter wakes up in the visor. And I recreated all of the sounds that happen upon a level load in Republic Commando for that specific scene. And the director was like, "What are those sounds that you added?" And I said, "Well, it's the level load from Republic Commando, of your visor waking up, and it's just a nice Easter egg." And he's like, "Oh, well, yeah, we got to do that. Yeah, leave that in."
That's awesome.
I have a question about that. Really quick before you move on, and I haven't asked you this, so it's interesting that I get to ask you online. I've seen you on one or two occasions doing sound design in real time, where I got to be in your office and you're like, "Oh, grab that and put that there," and blah blah blah. "Oh, you know what? In episode 2, I think there was this interesting thing. Okay, let's go into the archives. Okay, there's the episode 2 thing," and he does it at that speed, by the way. Like, because it's television, you have to actually work really. I mean, it was extraordinary how fast his hands were flying all over stuff and pulling things from the LucasFilm Archives. But I have a LucasFilm Archives question. Your video game stuff is all in the LucasFilm Archives of sound effects, but is that sort of an interesting, since LucasArts is no longer around, is that sort of an interesting, like, if you imagine the LucasFilm Archives as the digital version of the warehouse from Raiders of the Lost Ark with the boxes, are you going in a forgotten corner in the back of the warehouse where all of the video game sounds are living, and none of the other sound designers know about that area? I mean, tell me about that.
Yeah.
They know about it. I mean, the answer is probably not as interesting as the finding the lost ark somewhere in a giant warehouse. But
do you ever throw the whip to Matt Wood and he throws you the idol and then he's
that's right. Well, here's the real answer. The real answer is I was there when a lot of those sounds were made, even if I didn't make them. I was still having meetings about, here's how we're going to name this file for the engine. Where it'll have this kind of prefix suffix. All really boring, dry stuff for this interview. But the way that the Skywalker sound library is, and I think any effects library for anyone working in sound design, is, it's a database, and you look things up, like, you type in keywords and there are descriptions and categories and what movie is it from, what show is it from, what collection is it from. The LucasArts stuff, we were a small group at LucasArts by comparison to Skywalker Sound. And so we didn't have a full-time librarian writing all of these descriptions and cataloging all this stuff. So there was a data transfer, really a data dump from LucasArts to Sky Sound, and they have a Sky Effects LucasArts specific library. But when you go into it, it's a little hard to wrap your head around if you don't have any context. There's the file names and there's what game it's from, But it's thousands and tens of thousands of files. Well, I named a lot of those files. So for me, I'm in this unique position where I can just go in and be like, okay, I hear a sound in my head. You know what would be really cool for this is that UI sound from the original Star Wars Battlefront for the, you know, on the blue screen moving around. It's like the Star Wars Starfighter UI would be great for this little button that Omega pushes. I hear it in my head. Let me go find it. Ah, there it is.
That's amazing.
And I just spot it in, and it's in, and I move on. You know, and it's just because I hear Star Wars. I don't just hear the movies in my head. I hear the games because of how often
you're an incredible threshold right there, David. I mean, you're in the middle point of the shows, the movies, the animation, and the video games. Is there another person like you? In production like that?
In terms of video games, no.
That's incredible.
In terms of films and TV, well, I mean, the ultimate source is Matthew Wood, and I think that he just kind of trusted me to kind of bring that back in. And
but that's really the question that I have, dude, is that it's like because you have that institutional knowledge of where a treasure trove of Star Wars sounds that were never heard in the movies or the TV shows.
Yeah.
But you know where they are. And you're the only guy who knows that they're there. So in a way, I
don't know if that's true.
Well, is it true though? I mean, you just said that you know, like for example,
I guess it's a little true.
Would have an insight.
Anyone could do it. Anyone could go in and grab those sounds and find something they like and cut it in. I just don't know if they have the emotional attachment to it that I have.
And that's the other equation too. Is that who you find yourself working with, both of you guys, when you're working on Lucas projects? Because, you know, as we all know, Star Wars is all of ours now. It's much bigger than a idea that George Lucas had. We all own it in a way. Do you feel that when you go to work on a Star Wars project, that everybody has this real deep appreciation and knowledge and layers of love that stretch forever?
Sam, I would say yes. I would say that when, like, for example, it's not widely known, but they generally tap a lot of us when they need background voices for stuff. And it's simply because they're like, who do we know that knows how to make sounds that sound like they're in Star Wars? Well, these guys, these girls, you know what I mean? Like they grab the voice actors that worked on various Star Wars projects like Clone Wars, and they bring us in, you know, and we don't really ever talk about it, but I mean, you know,
you're in the family.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, you know, David Collins and I, enabled by Matt Wood, we have snuck in every Star Wars movie that Disney has come out with. There is a conversation between two stormtroopers, and it's always me and David, and it's always about the same subject. They're always talking about this piece of equipment that keeps getting revised or downgraded or upgraded, and it's always this, like, the same essential piece of equipment but different versions. So it's the most boring subject matter, but in every movie, if you listen, you can hear stormtroopers talking about the T something. And there's a whole chronology to the drama behind the evolution of it all grew out of, okay, remember in Star Wars Episode 4, and they either say the TC-16 or the T-16. We just decided to call it T-16, a different piece of equipment than the Skyhopper, by the way. But the stormtroopers go,
"Hey, did you hear about the T-16? Yeah, some of the other guys were telling about it. That's something, quite a thing to see. What was that? That's nothing.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it."
And so we reasoned that, like, when Force Awakens happened, there's two stormtroopers talking, and then this time the stormtroopers go,
"Hey, did you hear about the new T-17? Yeah, I hear it's quite a thing to see. Oh, no, it's not. They should have stuck with the 16. Like, the 17 is, you know, hype.
Yeah.
No, you know."
And so
we came up with rev numbers.
Yes.
Like, okay, here's the rev, and here's the crazy thing. And sorry, Sam, I'll let you continue. It made it into the subtitling. Like, if you watch,
that's awesome.
If you watch Force Awakens on the Blu-ray or online, and you turn on the subtitles, when Rey's sneaking around, you'll hear these two just dippy, you know, idiots in Starkiller Base talking about how T-17s are finally replacing these T-16s, and I hear they're great. And Sam's like, no, that's what they do.
No, they're not. No. They should have stuck with this.
They're terrible.
And what's funny is, and then if you go to, like, for example, depending on where you are in the chronology, if you go to Rogue One, the two stormtroopers on the beach are like,
"Hey, did you hear the T-15 is being marked obsolete? Yeah, it's about time for that."
You know, like, the T-16 happens in Star Wars.
Yeah, the T-16s are about to become new, thus setting up the conversation.
Oh, that's
between
amazing.
the two idiots in A New Hope, because now they're new. Yeah, they're quite a thing to see, you know. And then, and then if you go back even further in Solo, in Mimban, there's two mud troopers in the pit going. I think Sam goes, 15s are down. And I just say, we walk from here, you know, and it's just like,
Indiana Jones.
There's this whole like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern type of,
that's amazing.
There's a logic
trooper commentary going on.
Yeah, you know? that if you're a stormtrooper, this is extremely meaningful continuity. But if you're anyone else, this doesn't mean a damn. No one cares. But for stormtroopers, this is really interesting. But anyway,
I see a Dave Filoni animated series in your future on this, you guys.
And again, it feels like such a an ego weird thing that we're doing, except for the fact that we do it anyway, and Matt Wood makes sure that it gets in the movie, and it's so well,
he's
dumb.
The mastermind. I mean, he actually is on Rise of Skywalker and The Last Jedi. He's like, we got to find a place for this, and he actually sat me down and had me scrub through as a Skyzone employee, scrub through reels of. I'm not kidding you. Of Solo? It was either Solo or I think it was Solo. He had me scrub through reels and be like, "Where can we put this thing?" You know. And in Last Jedi, it's really, really buried in the background. But in Rise of Skywalker, it's, you know, they're going through, and I can't remember what it was, but it's like 17s aren't working. Okay, we're going to go on foot. Or are they doing the perimeter or whatever? We're looking for them on Kijimi or something. But yeah, it's in everything. And Matt really is. I mean, he's the guy that basically put together this loop troupe of actors to, you know, be huge nerds and create all the background characters.
I love it.
You know, now also for Marvel, he's, you know, we did WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier and all that stuff too. I mean, he's really mastered how to put together these troops of actors that are going to bring tons of improv, because there's just all these cues you have to fill, and it has to sound legit and somehow in universe.
Totally.
And if you're going to improvise, you have to know how to put things together in Star Wars lingo and then move on, you know, because it happens so quickly. So you know so they do, you know, they're talking about the institutional knowledge. They bring us in for the odd thing, trusting that we'll be able to help fill out their background stuff. I mean, you know, and again, we don't talk about it. Like I'm in Mandalorian, I'm that security droid that says to Bill Burr, you know, you are prisoner 45387, you know, come with, you know, Marshall Dune immediately, or whatever the hell he says. And, like me and David played the same guy in Rogue One who's banging on the door, help us. It ping pongs between our voices for that guy. I got to say, because the production sound was filled with noise. And so they had us
for sure. Yeah.
So that's
Mandalorian with like, yeah, go ahead, Victor.
I want to ask how much things have changed, because you guys were both pre-Disney and a part of the Star Wars and LucasFilm, LucasArts family, and were there for a long time, actually, you know, working on different things. And then Disney came in, and it felt like it ballooned. It just got huge and big, and the movies came back. Disney Plus, I think, has just been a huge benefit to fantasy-fueled escapism across Marvel and Star Wars. But does it feel the same, or does it feel more pressure, or does it feel like it's the same kinds of work, same people? Talk a bit about how it's changed.
It seemed like it was going to entirely change, and then now years later, it's like, no, it's all the usual suspects. It's all the people that, I mean, they're the old guard at Lucasfilm is alive and well. You know, I mean, which just feels great. You just keep bumping into the same people, and they're doing the same jobs, you know, and I think for me, it's really heartening, because Lucasfilm was okay. Like, you know, when Clone Wars was doing its thing, Lucasfilm, and this goes for David as well, being in the video game division. Star Wars is like, you know, one of the biggest mythologies of the world, if not like the biggest, and, you know, all stemming from this incredible film that George Lucas made against all odds.
Yeah.
And then you fast forward, and George is trying all kinds of weird stuff, and not always have the press been kind to those efforts.
Yes.
Like for example, the gaming press hasn't always been effusive in terms of especially the sound work. The gaming press tends to gloss over, oh, it's just the Star Wars sounds, or they might even say, oh, it's the great Star Wars sounds, and they don't realize, no, those sounds were meticulously recreated in different ways for the needs of these video games. Like much more work went in than just pressing the Star Wars button, right? And then in the meantime, Lucasfilm Animation, when it started, was I don't know, I would say a bit of an underdog. The fans didn't accept it. Who's this tween that Skywalker's been set up with that says Sky Guy and R2E and this Ahsoka character, we don't want her, we never asked for her, and all this stuff. And so but David and I were working in different parts of Lucasfilm, and sometimes the same parts of Lucasfilm, whether it be Force Unleashed or Clone Wars or video games, Republic Commando, all these things. We did it because we thought it was cool. That's the only reason we did it. Someone said, oh, you got paid. Be like, not always very well. It's not about that. It was never about that. It was always about, we love Star Wars, we think it's cool. So and sometimes that's a painful journey when the critics savage you or the fans savage you, and it's not that much fun. So to fast forward years later and see that these things that were seen as failures at the time, like Clone Wars for a while was seen as this giant misstep failure, right?
Right.
Now it's this legendary thing. Republic Commando at the time, I remember David Collins. Do you know David Collins? I don't know why I used both your first and last name, but David Collins said to me, but David was like, we worked really hard on Republic Commando, and this is the response we're getting. And I remember feeling like he'd been beat up a little bit. And now fast forward and people were like, Republic Commando? Oh my God. There's been a weird vindication. So when you talk about the old guard at Lucasfilm, the old guard are the people that have been through all those things and who have taken their lumps and have taken punches and slings and arrows and all this stuff. And to go forward and see that the old guard is the nucleus behind things like, Bad Batch and Mandalorian, and that Lucasfilm Animation, for example, these underdogs are now stronger than ever in terms of their ability to put out incredible content. So yeah, it's very vindicating and really fun to bump into all these people that, I felt like at the time we're like, well, we're doing this weird thing and no one really cares, but we think it's really cool. And now fast forward and the fans are like, no, we all think it's really cool. Like, oh, cool. Awesome. And Bad Batch is interesting because Bad Batch is like it's the first time that I've seen a Lucasfilm Animation project that was out of the gate accepted by the fans. That's fun to see, because usually they just beat the hell out of you for the first season or two, and then they start locking into it. And this one, they're like, we think Omega's cool and we like the Bad Batch. And we're like, oh, that's cool. From an observer, from an observer standpoint, my standpoint, it's super awesome to see home team, the old guard at Lucasfilm, hitting a home run out of the gate.
David, you feel similarly? I love this. I love this era. I'm having more fun now than I've ever had, and I was so lucky to have a chance to work on Star Wars once during my 10 years at LucasArts. I felt like I'd won the lottery. I went away and I worked at Sony for a while and I went freelance for a while. And then my phone started ringing again. To have lightning strike twice like that is, I just can't believe my good fortune in being able to do this stuff. So I give it everything I have because it's my first love and my greatest passion is Star Wars. And this era is filled with so much opportunity that feels like everyone is now seeing it the way that I've seen it since I was a child, which is, well, but everything looks to Star Wars because it's the biggest brand in the world, right? And now it feels like that. When we were doing Force Unleashed, there were games and there was Clone Wars, and it was a huge brand, but at a very family small company, And now there's so much great material coming out that the opportunity to grow and to work in animation and work in film and then, work in games as well. Speaking of which, one just kind of a nice sort of friendship story. So Sam and I have known each other for over 20 years. And We met through one of my childhood friends, and he just was just a huge supporter of games and Star Wars in general, and just called me one day, and so we've been friends ever since. Obviously, we got to work together and all of that. For the last 15 weeks, I've received 2 phone calls. One is from my friend Harrison Deutsch, who a couple years ago shipped Jedi Fallen Order because he's a dialogue supervisor at Respawn.
Nice.
And he called me every Friday morning to tell me what he thought of the episode. And the other was Sam Witwer.
That's
for the last 15 weeks, without fail, every Friday morning, I got a phone call from my 2 friends about Star Wars.
Awesome.
And it felt like we were kids. Even though I worked on it, it felt like we were kids because he was, just I didn't spoil anything for him. I didn't,
Thank God you didn't.
Watch out for this. Even though he was Darth Maul, even though he did the Phantom Apprentice episode and that crazy arc in season 7 and everything he had done before, Mortis, everything.
I could feel that in Sam's tweets. I could feel that he was just along for the ride and just, I think, really reveling in that, weren't you? That cool new opportunity.
So here's how I felt when Bad Batch episodes would come out, or a Mandalorian episode, or Clone Wars. Even when Clone Wars, just to take you back, when Clone Wars first came out, I wasn't a huge fan. Having said that, I also recognized that there was tons of potential and a lot of really good work being done. So I was like, look, it's a kid's show. It's not for me, but I'm glad they're doing this, because this is filling in the spot that used to be the Droids Ewoks Adventure Hour. And this is infinitely higher quality than that. Right.
Sure.
Even though I love that old show. Then going forward, George Lucas aging the series every year so that it appealed to, if it was made for 8-year-olds in season 1, season 2 is for 9-year-olds. Eventually you start reaching the point where George Lucas is like, well, I made The Empire Strikes Back for 12-year-olds, so it's got to get to that level of sophistication. He was smart enough to keep aging that show. And around season 2, I started going to David and be like, hey, I'm really starting to like the Clone Wars, like genuinely, like not just appreciate it, but I'm really starting to get pulled into the story. And then they hired me. So I want to make sure that what I say, to answer your question, it isn't actually colored by my participation or non-participation in Lucasfilm. I became a fan of Clone Wars before they hired me.
You and I had a very frank discussion about The Last Jedi on one of your previous appearances on the show. And I think that's one of the things that we're all learning as Star Wars fans, right? Is that, divisive things can come from this galaxy, from this universe of content, but it adds to it. It stacks on top of it. And the tendrils go out in a bunch of different ways. And what we're seeing now with the technology and the generational kind of connection to the mythology of Star Wars and the new money, let's be honest, that Disney keeps investing into this brand because it is so important to the company, is these risks are paying off, and we're getting, and it's just like waking up on Friday mornings or staying up too late.
Well, so the way that I feel, and again, just to address what you said, I don't necessarily, like, I have my opinions like anyone else. I don't necessarily love every piece of Star Wars that I see. Having said that, I want people to love Star Wars, right? So if someone asks me my opinion, happy to give you my opinion, but I'm not out there trying to prosecute my opinion and that everyone must agree with me. I'm like, no, I have no interest in making people dislike something that they like, especially if it's Star Wars, because anyone liking Star Wars helps my cause, which is I love Star Wars, right? So that's my feeling on even the, like, again, that was my feeling when Clone Wars came out. I'm like, I don't like this, and I don't like that they're doing this, and this, and I don't like that, but I appreciate that they're doing this. And I like this and this and this. I think that's cool. And then eventually it won me over. So again, just to make it clear, when people ask me my opinion, I'm always very honest about it. But I'm only answering because someone asked. I'm not out there trying to change people's minds on what they love, because life is short. And when you love something, that makes life a little bit better, especially when it comes to entertainment. But anyway, to answer your question about what this is all like for me, when Bad Batch comes out, I get to lay on my floor, turn off the lights in my TV room, lay around with my dogs, crank the audio, and watch a little Star Wars movie. every Friday. And that's why I called David, because I'm like, hey, did you see the new Star Wars movie this Friday? Did you make?
I didn't see it.
And it's the same.
I made it.
It's the same thing I feel about Mandalorian. It's like I sit down and I love being transported to that universe. It's my favorite thing in the world. And it's a couple of friends of mine developed this theory about, they call it the window theory, which is that when you're like somewhere between 8 years old to 16 or 17 years old, your window is open and you are watching something and fully taking in what it is, and you're not questioning it. You're just experiencing it. Right. And then as you start getting older, you start getting more sophisticated, but you also start having things like ego get involved, and your window starts closing. And some of that is good and some of that is bad. The good part is the sophistication. The bad part is your own ego and your own, preference. And basically you start saying, well, I wouldn't have done it this way, or I would have done it that way. And I don't like this because of that reason or this reason. And that's normal. That's fine. But as you get older, as eventually the window sort of closes, unless you're trying to keep it open, unless you're trying to pry it open. And for me, I think as I've gotten older, especially in this business, I just want to be entertained.
Totally. Yeah. And it must be hard for both of you guys to be open to that, because you're so intimately involved. And how do you not dissect these things? And
it's,
watch
the thing, right? Okay. Yeah. So for example, for like, say, Star Trek Picard, if we're talking about, in the sci-fi world, I just love the hell out of it. Now, if you were to put my cap on of being critical, I can rattle off a list of things that I'm like, why did you do that? But I'm like, dude, am I here to be entertained or not? Am I here to look for things to love or not? Am I going to keep my window open a little bit, or am I just going to shut it? So I ended up absolutely loving Picard. Star Wars is harder because I work on it. So necessarily my cap of being critical of Star Wars, because that cap goes firmly on when I work on it. You can ask David, I'm a pain in the ass. I'm like, I don't know about this line, or I'm bumping on this. Why, should he? I mean, you can ask Dave Filoni, and he's just like,
just say the line, Sam. Say the
line. Saying to Dave, I'm like, he's calling him this, and he really should call him that, and stuff like that. And the problem is sometimes I'll actually hit on a real problem, so they tolerate me when I bring up all this stuff, because they're like, every now and then Sam will find something, so let's just let him talk. But having said that, they make it easy for me to keep that window open. When I watch Bad Batch, it's easy for me to get excited about Star Wars and just become a 12-year-old again. When I watch Mandalorian, they just have their bases. The Bad Batch, Mandalorian, the bases are so covered in terms of the detail and richness of this universe and what the heart of Star Wars. They have it so right. And also they focus on things on corners of this huge galaxy that are easier for our busy minds to wrap themselves around.
I think one of the challenges with Clone Wars, and Sam, you and I had a text chain going on because you knew every single corner and you were telling me every single reason why. And I was like, holy crap, this is a novel about, and so I watched the show again with all of that insight. But it's dense. Like Clone Wars, like you have to commit. Like there's a thing happening here and over there, and there's intersection there, and there's ramifications over there. Bad Batch has that too, but it's about these people, and we can focus on that. And Mandalorian, same thing, right? Like the containment of the adventure, I think, was a major benefit in the additive qualities of these shows and how they connect to everything, but also being able to get our focus. They didn't over complicate the situation or overreach with what they were pulling in. And the way that they grow feels very akin to the way the growth of 1977 Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back kind of grew. It feels less encumbered by the weight of our expectation and more about just reveling in the joy of the fantasy fulfillment. It's amazing work. Yeah. I mean, that's my observation.
Absolutely. And for me, when there is a certain attention to detail being paid, it just helps to create the drama you know, how certain things work and how they behave, and also just observing. You know, I remember, this is going to sound funny, but it's like, again, one of the cardinal rules for me in making Star Wars is, you know, especially, or playing Darth Maul or whatever, is you got to make sure that what you're making is at least aware of what has been made, and that it enhances what has been made. Because people worked really hard on that thing over there. And in fact, if people are still talking about that thing that was made 20, 30 years ago, they've really achieved something. And you always want to give a different perspective on things, but you must make sure that you don't necessarily step on things. I remember when the Fantasy Flight Star Wars role-playing game was coming out, and there was a little sidebar. They were talking about hyperspace travel, and there was all this. In role-playing game books, there's always a bunch of lore, right? And they were writing and I was reading the beta version of their book, right? And there was a whole sidebar about hyperspace travel, how it works, and that if you hyperdrive into a planet, it has devastating consequences to the planet. It might crack the planet in half or devastate a continent if you're flying hyperdrive and you smash into a planet. To which I immediately wrote an email saying, you have to eliminate that sidebar. Well, why? It's a great sidebar. Be like, because they would never have built the Death Star. And the drama of Star Wars depends on the Death Star. Don't undercut the drama of Star Wars. You know, there was a reason the Death Star was built, and that the Emperor, you know, put huge resources into it. And if you look at the Clone Wars, it even goes back on how they funded the Death Star and kept it secret and all that. It's not out front, but it's in that series. And
this is circling right back to Last Jedi, right?
Well, no. I mean, look. I'm speaking purely as a guy who has worked on this. You know, I'm not commenting on, for example, you know, I'm a huge Robert E. Howard fan. That doesn't mean that I don't love other people writing for Conan every now and then. You know what I mean? Yeah. You have to introduce the new blood. But but what I'm saying is, concerning Bad Batch, when I watch it and I consider the implications of things, it exists even though they're taking risks and doing weird stuff. I'm like, that's a really interesting perspective on that, or that gives a new little twist to something that I've seen before. The fact that this happened here. And I just love, I love working with people that have that institutional knowledge. David Collins has that. If I say, what if we do this? He can go, but if we do, that affects this and this, and we have to be aware of that. Dave Filoni, same thing. He has a computer in his brain where I go, what if I say this line instead, Dave? And Dave goes, well, we got to make sure, because Vader does this. So we got to make sure not to tread on Vader territory. He's got to be unique, even though, you know, like he'll go, and then he'll go into a monologue about, like, you know, it's important that these characters remain distinct from each other. It's one of the reasons why General Grievous is who he is in the Lucas Clone Wars. And he was totally different in the Gennady Clone Wars. In the Gennady Clone Wars, he's a little too close to Vader. He's the unstoppable cyborg. Be like, no, we've already done that. That's Vader. Yeah. Grievous is Nosferatu. He's the villain that takes his cape and goes, ah! He's that guy, you know?
Yeah.
They've been working on this stuff for so long that their knowledge, their institutional knowledge, is pretty unassailable. And when they do deviate from an expectation, you know that it's a very calculated move. It's really move. Fun to watch.
David, you know, I would like to add, if I can, you know, I think going back to your earlier question about, you know, how has it changed under Disney, and my answer being about more opportunity. Sam refers to it as the old guard. I think probably a more crystallized way to say it is not old or new, because there are a ton of young new employees, of which, you know, Sam and I were both at one point. The common thing, and what's really been preserved, and I think had an opportunity to shine even more because there's more opportunity, is company culture that was set by George Lucas, set by Dave Filoni. And the company culture is one of highest standards of excellence at ILM, Skywalker Sound, LucasArts, and the core, I guess, the sort of old company mission is excellence and surprise and delight at every turn, and that requires an insane amount of passion and knowledge. You know, there are some employees that I've met now in the Disney era that have come on that are just, they live, eat, sleep, breathe this stuff as fans, and they apply that to their work. You know, and so, you know, it's almost more of like an old guard culture, like a traditional culture. But there are more people working on Star Wars now than ever before. You know, there's a real sense of camaraderie and loving the same thing and working on the same thing, because you all want to go the extra mile. I mean, just doing the finale of the Bad Batch, you know, the scheduling was, for whatever reason, you know, we get to the end of the season and the scheduling gets a little tight, and we're doing both of those last 2 episodes very quickly, but everyone is just pouring their love and their know-how into it. And I don't mean by working crazy hours, because part of being really good at something, which is what's so amazing about the Lucasfilm animation team, is that they're able to do things that look photoreal or hyper stylized and amazing in a very short amount of time. You know, because a lot of people out there can do things that are amazing on their home computers, but it's about how quickly and efficiently you can do it and know that it's right. And it does take that passion and that knowledge of the lore, or, you know, sort of the self-discipline to bring that to the series. And I think that that's really what I've seen in the Disney era, is that there is this sort of collective excitement of making new Star Wars, but still making it feel, you know, especially with the Bad Batch, as true to the George's roots and to the Clone Wars and everything that came before, than we even had the opportunity to express back in the day, because we were a much smaller company. I don't know if that makes sense.
It's, you know, you make a really good point, because some of the people that I'm including in this old guard thing, when I really review it, I'm like, oh no, those were Disney era hires, you know, like, oh, the old guard, like Star Wars Rebels. Be like, Star Wars Rebels was after the
Disney show. I think it's more accurate to say that it's a culture. You know,
it's a culture. No, you're totally right.
Largely,
you're totally right.
You know, and Kathleen Kennedy came in and she said, we are going to make Star Wars. We're going to make stuff. We're going to make all kinds of stuff, as opposed to, well, and this could have been a very easy move back in the 2000s of, we don't need to make anything. We're going to license everything out, because we have a license to print money with this brand, and we're going to let everyone else absorb the risk. You know,
yeah.
And
do you remember
what happened? The exact opposite has happened. Kathy
That's
Kennedy
right.
came in, and now we're making more than we've ever made before. I mean, stagecraft.
It's a feast. It's a buffet, man.
What we're doing. I can't tell you enough how excited I am by, you know, by everything that's going on, and all of the energy, the sort of influx of energy, and all this new production that's happening. It feels like it must have felt for ILM in that warehouse in Van Nuys in the 70s, and then making the trilogy. There's this air of excitement in the air, you know. And
but they had to wait, though. That's like, they had to wait. They had to like, well, they were busy, but we as fans, we had to wait so long. We were reading our Star logs and, you know, checking out the comic books and just making up stories in our minds. Now we get them all the time, you know, and it's made by people that love it.
And one of the things that Sam and I have been talking about for 20 years, I'm not even kidding you.
I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, Sam mentioned Star Trek, and Sam really is the reason why I love Star Trek. I had seen, you know, the big movies in theaters as a kid, but you know, when I met Sam, I started putting Star Trek episodes of the original series in my Netflix queue back when it was like 2 episodes on a DVD. And Sam kind of encouraged me to keep going, and I watched all the original series, all of the Next Generation, you know, all the films over again, even some of the ones I couldn't remember even watching. And what I said to him at the time was, boy, you know what's interesting about Star Trek is that it's a numbers game. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, imagine loving Star Wars and worshiping it like it's the greatest thing in the world, and it's 3 movies. And then a 4th one comes out called The Phantom Menace. And what happens if you don't like it? Your A+ series now averages a C, and you are devastated by that because you've been holding this finite amount of footage to such a high standard that anything new is threatening, even if it's good, you know. And we can talk about how opinions of things change over time.
And that's because when they saw this, their window was wide open. They accepted these 3 movies.
Yes.
People, you know, I've talked to people who were like, there's only one Star Wars movie. I'm like, what Star Wars movie is that? The original. You know, The Empire Strikes Back with that Muppet. That's not very good. And you're like, your window was Anyway, continue.
But so this idea that, you know, Star Trek: The Next Generation is this beloved series, but I'm watching an episode of season 1 where there's this leotard jazzercise planet, and Wesley Crusher steps on some flowers, and now he's going to be executed for it, and everyone's very 80s and fabulous, and I'm just like, this is not great, Star Trek. You know, but nobody cares about that. We love The Next Generation. We love Picard. We love the crew of the Enterprise. You know, that Star Wars has moved into that kind of
it totally has
of a property where, you know, if there's something that you love or you don't love, it doesn't matter, because someone posted recently, Star Wars is like a restaurant. You know, you're not going to love everything.
Raul.
Yeah. You're not going to love everything on the menu. But,
how much is Dave Filoni kind of responsible for this, or can share some credit for this? How much? I mean, you guys have both got personal relationships with him, and I've worked with him over there.
My belief is hugely, because, you know, he's George's Padawan. He's the guy that trained under George, working with him for over 10 years. So that guy, you know, I make a lot of jokes, you know, and people sometimes retell stories where I caught David on a continuity mistake, and be like, yeah, you know how many times that guy has schooled me when I was about to make a mistake that would have gotten the Star Wars fans very angry at me. Dave has been through it. Dave really understands it on a molecular DNA level. And you know, and Jon Favreau really also seems to very much get it. So you put those two guys together, and it's very, very exciting. But David Collins is right, because like if you want these things to continue, and I've said this before, you have to accept that new blood has to be introduced into these beloved mythologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to love it, but you need to accept that they're all building blocks, that you do not get, you know, like you don't get the next step without, for example, you know, without Force Awakens, you don't get The Mandalorian. So whether you loved Force Awakens or disliked Force Awakens, this was how it needed to be built. These are all built, you know, building blocks, and new blood needs to be introduced. You know, Last Jedi is obviously a hot topic to this day, but it was you know, whether you loved it or hated it, you do not continue on this journey of making new stuff if you're not willing to accept new blood and new ideas. And that's very, very important. It stagnates and dies if you don't allow that. Like David said, Star Wars could very easily become a brand where they print it on toilet paper and sell it, or it's just a Star. You know, we made this person wanted to make.
Or remember how cool that was?
They took the Spock helmet from years ago and put Star Wars on it and sold it. You know what I mean? If you know the Spock helmet, that's a deep cut. But, you know, they could have become just a licensing brand. And I remember when Kathy Kennedy made that announcement to the company that was very secret at the time, that there would be a lot of new Star Wars. And I remember having the conversation with David. It'd be like, it's going to become Star Trek now, where people need to exercise a little bit of discipline to watch what they love and discard the rest, which is how Star Trek has always worked from the very beginning. You know, City on the Edge of Forever is amazing. Spock's brain isn't that great, but it's all there. You know what I mean? And that's, you know, my personal take on that. So going forward,
you asked too, Victor, is it hard to, you know, to watch things without being critical? It actually works both ways, because one of the things that we talk about a lot is how hard this stuff is to make.
It's so hard.
When you know how difficult it is to do something, your level of appreciation for everything is incredibly high, because you have this empathy behind the creative effort that informs everything that you watch. So yes, you can see things maybe, or hear things that maybe an average consumer doesn't, because that's your business. But at the same time, you know exactly when something is presented to you on screen, how much effort went into that. Or if you don't, you're even more bewildered, because you're like, how did they do that? That must have been a huge undertaking. So you kind of give it this, you kind of become a cheerleader for it.
Right.
You know, I do a podcast called The Soundtrack Show, where I didn't work on any of these scores, but I just feel this constant need to praise the effort because of how it enriches our lives. And
it's incredibly important. I feel, I mean, that's the joy for me too, right? Is to because I'm a critic as well, and I review these things, but I feel like I don't know, my life is enriched by being able to connect with the creative impulse. I think that's what makes us a human race. You know, like we live to, you know, present something, a story, to leave something behind as we move through the years. And I think it's incredibly inspirational to tap into people that wake up with that determination. It's not just, grinding to make money that makes a life rich. It's that moment to appreciate our act of creation and creativity and storytelling that makes a life rich, and I love getting into that head.
It's really interesting when you work on Star Wars, because it's the creative impulse, but under a pressure cooker. And the pressure cooker, I mean, I thought I felt a lot of pressure when it came to Force Unleashed, being like, hey, creating Star Wars characters is hard. And if they don't like this Star Killer guy, it's got my face on it. So, oh boy, right? Cut ahead to Clone Wars, and you're going to be playing the dark side of the Force. He's the son, and George Lucas, blah blah blah. Here's his idea. I'm like, so now it's a direct George Lucas idea that I have to do, and I'm playing the dark side. And if I screw this up, then the dark side sucks. Oh, great, fantastic! Talk about hurting other pieces of Star Wars that have already existed, and then if I suck, then and then now you're going to be doing Darth Maul. They're like, oh great, so now I have an opportunity to make that suck. And the hard part is you try your best, and you're trying to connect to your own creative impulses while being aware of everything that has been made, and then trying to ignore the pressure of how is this going to be received by the fans. And here's the other thing. You don't always know what you're getting from the fans, because, right, the way things are released. Like, for example, there was an unnamed Netflix series that came out and released a number of episodes, and it ends on a giant cliffhanger. Well, until that cliffhanger is resolved, people are either hating or loving whatever that is. And that's how it exists. When Ahsoka Tano came out, there's a tween. I can't believe this. This is terrible. And that's how it existed until public opinion changed. For a good week, I was the guy who ruined Darth Maul, because Darth Maul was a spider creature. And until the next episode came out, there were audience members who understood this is all part of a story, and it's all going to change, and it's going to be interesting, and I'm drawn in by this. And then there were other audience members who were like, why did you even call it Darth Maul? This weird spider thing isn't Darth Maul. This is crap.
Right.
And so for a week, I got to enjoy, getting beaten senselessly on Twitter. But so, and the thing is the fans, if I were to give them advice, it's always be patient. You may not like this, but you might like the next thing. It might be your favorite thing if you're just patient. Just,
so true.
Have a little faith, that's
one thing that has changed. Fan culture in general, and the platforming that every voice has out there, over the last 2 decades, the Facebooks and the YouTubes and the Twitter, and how quickly the mob can shift, and it must be terrifying to build in that era. But I think what's happened with the Bad Batch is I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think universally there has just been this a love and appreciation and acceptance, and that must be weird too. It must be weird to put that out. It's just like,
what's that like, David?
What?
What is that like?
I mean, I have to first of all say that the Bad Batch owes a tremendous debt to Clone Wars season 7. And I don't even mean the Bad Batch arc, of course. And by the way, I would love to take an opportunity to thank the countless number of people that worked on the sound of Bad Batch, and not just me. I'm just here talking, but including Kimberly Patrick and Bonnie Wild, and a lot of Sky Sound artists that did Rebels and Clone Wars before I was ever given the opportunity, and then they showed me how to do it. But if we didn't have those super strong arcs in the Clone Wars and leave on such a high, that goodwill, I feel like, was directly transferred over. And with the Bad Batch, I don't even know if it was necessarily about those characters, because they weren't playing our Looking Glass through this era in the Clone Wars. They were playing these other super soldiers that were kind of an interesting, what do you call them? Not interesting thread, but they were Clone Force 99, which means that they were clones that were what's the word I'm looking for?
Defective in some way.
Defective. There it is. Defective.
Yeah.
I was going to say aberrant, but yeah, defective. And that's all that they really were. It was just kind of like, oh, you got the big one, and you got the Rambo one, and you've got the technology one, and you've got the bloodthirsty one. But now they're this, you're watching all of that break down, and it really is because of where we came before. And I will say though, in terms of this era of YouTube and platforms, I've actually I really enjoyed watching fan reactions because we didn't get our screening because of COVID. We didn't get our Star Wars Celebration, announcement. Where you get to watch the episode with fans and hear 4,000 people freak out. We didn't get any of that, and so I get it by watching, YouTube reactions or seeing Twitter, and it's been really gratifying. But you also do learn. There are things that you can anticipate. There's how I look at it. And like Infested is a great example. I loved working on that episode. It was like the closest I've ever gotten to working on Aliens. But the amount of fan anxiety that the show itself created about what's going to happen with Crosshair, generated a legitimate impatience for that episode. And so the word filler comes out, and I just sit there and go, oh, that's fascinating. These problems I think ultimately get relegated to history. They become historical problems because just like Ahsoka Tano, just everything that Sam's been saying, they become origins. They become those episodes that you go back to and you're like, oh, I forgot about this episode. This is so fun. Yeah. How interesting, that this is where Sid and the Batch were, and where Omega was at this point or whatever.
Yeah, it's taken
time. All you can do is march to the finale, and that's valid. That's a valid. It's about how we consume the media, but that's also a fleeting. It becomes historical. I shouldn't say fleeting because it's not unimportant. It's just that it does become a part of Star Wars' history, and our opinions about media change over time.
They do.
I've been on this Kurosawa kick because I've been working on, I worked on Star Wars Visions, and it's fascinating.
I can't wait for that, by the way. Holy crap, does that look incredible? Oh my God.
Wish I could talk about it.
We are so freaking spoiled, man. I mean, that's the way I feel. I'm just sitting here. Okay, send me the codes. I'll review this. It's like, okay.
I went from the Bad Batch finale straight into Visions. In fact, there was some overlap. So, but anyway, this idea that Seven Samurai and Ikiru and some of these classic movies were not that well received or mediocre received by critics, and now historically, are called the greatest piece, not just the greatest movies to ever come out of Japan, but the greatest pieces of world cinema ever.
Blade Runner,
greatest directors. Blade Runner is a perfect example. Our way we perceive our art changes over time. And I've just become comfortable with that more than I was in my 20s when I was making, Bounty Hunter, Republic Commando, or Force Unleashed. I've become a little bit more relaxed about it because there's more Star Wars, there's more opportunity, there's and fans, their opinion is.
Dude, it's what's so interesting is, again, we're not, what I don't want to say is, oh, people are coming at it with the wrong mindset, because the fact is, being patient is difficult. If you could read only one chapter of a book a week, and your chapter, nothing, it's all sort of little character moments and a little sort of side thing, but nothing really substantial happens in that week. Your opinion about that book for a week is going to be about that chapter. And that, but the thing is, in a book, not every chapter can be this giant momentous thing. Everything is, there's an old saying in Hollywood that if every line is a zinger, no lines are zingers. If every line is this witty thing, like, well, then nothing's witty, stories have to progress, and some moments need to be more incidental, and some moments are the important moments, and they're important because you showcase them, you build up to them. You can't literally do an important moment every 5 seconds and have that mean anything.
That's the challenge with episodic television too, which I think Mandalorian and Bad Batch have effectively navigated around. You can't have like all the characters are about to die every episode.
No, and imagine
it's something that, like the CW shows, which you did a great run on Supergirl on, and Smallville, we all look back with great love and admiration on. But that's one of the things that those shows have a real challenge with, because every episode is like, they're all going to die, and then nope, they're fine, and then they're all going to die, nope, they're fine,
and loses its meaning.
It does. So,
and it's interesting, if audience members in there, no one's asking me, but if some audience member asked me, how do I approach these things, I'd say, again, I'm talking about that window thing. And I learned a really important lesson about being an audience member from Frank Darabont, who's a friend of mine. Great guy.
Yep.
Frank Darabont.
Congrats to him, by the way.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow, man. You know,
that's a whole other hour and a half conversation, I'm sure.
I know, it really is.
Yeah, for anyone listening to this, look it up. Frank Darabont. You know, and if you want to know my personal stake in it, look me up in relation to Walking Dead, and you'll see me shooting my mouth off and blacklisting myself. Anyway, but Frank Darabont, we were talking about some series, and I'm not going to say what series it is because I feel like that could be taken the wrong way, but I felt like this series had lost its way, and I was like, I can't believe they did this and they did that. Oh, why did they do this? And it's just embarrassing. And why did they do that? And I was shooting my mouth off about this at a dinner, hang out with some friends. And Frank was like, well, I liked it. And I'm like, how could you like it, Frank? Because they did this. And why would they do that? And why would they do that? And he goes, well, you know, listen, man, I've been in this business for a long time. And I've learned that it is a minor miracle when anything ends up halfway good, let alone great or excellent. This is really, really hard. All of it's really, really hard. And I actually sit down to watch that show to be entertained. And you know what I liked? That they did this and this. I thought that was wildly wonderful and entertaining. You're right about the things they did wrong, but I'm not working on that. I'm watching to be entertained. And I was like, oh, I've got to check my ego and all of these things at the door. If I want to have a good night, I have an opportunity to have a good night. All I have to do is toss that stuff aside, toss my expectation aside, and allow it to entertain me for the things that it's doing right. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that helps me personally get through the weeks where I really want this to happen. Oh, it hasn't happened. Oh, it's a week where I didn't get what I wanted. When the stakes aren't that high because you're like, hey, let's just see what you got. You kind of sit back and let the story unfold rather than be white knuckled. Now, it's very hard if you're a Star Wars fan because the white knuckling that people do from episode to episode is because they love it so much. Yeah, because they, you know, from my own experience, when we introduced Darth Maul as a spider creature, we knew that some of the audience members would hate this because it's not what they expected. But we knew we had to do it. George knew we had to do it because Darth Maul can't just come back fully formed and say, "Hey boys, I'm back." And it's a terrible story. There had to be huge consequences for what happened in Phantom Menace, and there had to be an interesting new story being built from that. But having said that, me and Dave were very clear that the next episode after Spider Maul had to be Phantom Menace Maul, that we had to eventually give the audience what they wanted for a moment before we went off and built our own version of that character. We had to do the, you know, so you know, it's ebb, it's flow. The big important moments mean nothing if you don't have moments that are quote unquote less important. You know, you have to let this stuff all unfold. And then when you look back with history, you end up enjoying the incidental moments, the less important moments so much more because you're not white knuckling it. You're not afraid that, is it going to go anywhere? No, it'll go somewhere. It'll go somewhere. Just give it a second, you know?
I want to go back to Bad Batch here for a sec. And I feel like, guys, I want to have you back on both soon because there's so much that we can dive. Every discussion point just explodes in my mind about where we can go on all this. But Bad Batch introduced Omega. And Dave, I don't know how much you know about what they're going to do with Omega, but I think she's an amazing character. It's a fascinating character. Spoiler to those that haven't seen everything, but she's a clone like the Force 99, but she's fully formed as a kid, and she's older than the Bad Batch, which was when you hear that. But there is this sense of like they're going big with this character. This character is not incidental. She's not just a thing for the Batch to protect. David, I don't know what you know about where Omega goes, but I would love to hear what you guys think of Omega, and from the context of how important she will factor into not just the show, but Star Wars lore, because I think she's incredibly important. And I'm just guessing because I don't know where they're going.
I remember, having lived through the closure of LucasArts and watching the Clone Wars end and then come back and watching the Disney sale, which I thought, well, that would never happen. I mean, so many things have happened in Star Wars that probably around 6 or 7 years ago, I started saying this a lot to people, which is it's Star Wars. And so anything can happen. You just when you think something is over or wrapped up, I mean, Darth Maul came back, anything can happen. So historically, we know just looking at Ahsoka that, that is probably one of the greatest character arcs of all of Star Wars. And it just is promising to keep going. I know nothing about it. I mean, I'm in a good position because I know very little about where it's going. I mean, I can share that there's a season 2 because we all know it. But I just instinctively looking at Omega from what I was getting watching season 1, this makes sense to me that, if Jango requests an unaltered clone for himself as part of his payment, then the Kaminoans would probably be like, yeah, we should keep one of those, and so if she is an unaltered clone, there's Alpha and Omega, then, and aging naturally, then yes, she would be older than the Bad Batch, which were bred to immediately go out and kill clankers, terminate clankers. And so that part of it was fascinating to me. And this idea that was slowly revealed in the first season, yet she picks up the Zygerian bow, when I designed that bow, first of all, I didn't design it alone. It has its roots in sort of the Night Sister sounds that Dave Acord made for Clone Wars. But I did redo I added a lot of like clanking and kind of badassery to it. And then the fire sound of that bow, I made just bigger than life, bigger than her, bigger than anything else in the episode. I mean, they're the beginning of Decommission when she's doing target practice. It's just like, bling, 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 and I'm like, I look back at why I did that, and it's like, well, this is this huge power that she's not even ready to control yet. She can't control it yet. I mean, you got those noodle arms, Sid's character, and you got her, and then she just go bam, 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 bam. With some experience, that's where you can go. And even by the end of the episode, she's starting to get the hang of it.
Totally.
That to me is a perfect metaphor for the potential of Omega. She's got this. She's got this tremendous heart. I mean, I'm starting to see memes online of like, be more like Omega. It doesn't, she's always going to give you a second chance. She's always going to save you. She's always going to root for you, even when you're being, crosshair or being a total jerk and not seeing things, the same way as everyone else. And, but she's pure hearted. She's smart, and she's absorbing everything. Her window is wide open, Sam, she's absorbing everything the Batch is teaching her, and she's opening them. It's endless. I look at Omega and I just think it's endless, again, and it's perfect for her name. She can just go as far as the series decides to take her. That's Jennifer Corbett and Brad Rao and Filoni's job. My job is to just be there and help them realize their vision, which is something I love about sound. I also love, I was just thinking about this the other day. I don't think I've ever said this in an interview, but I love that I get to be the first human to hear what an episode is going to sound like.
Oh, wow.
Meaning, I get the dialogue from him and I get the visuals, and I'm already blown away by it. But Kiner brothers, they're over there making their music, with that team. The Foley crew, which is Frank Ranella, Margie O'Malley, Andrea Gard, Kim Patrick, they're even in COVID doing original recordings for every episode, footsteps and props and all kinds of little business to make the world feel real and alive. I'm cutting sound. I'm doing sound design. Sometimes I'll bring on, another editor too, because the schedule is tight and I need some help so I can focus on something like the bow, and I work up all my material. The Foley crew makes their delivery. Kiner makes their delivery, and I bring it all up in the session for the first time. And you start chipping away at it like it's a sculpture, and you just start going, oh my God, like that's when you start getting the goosebumps. This is incredible. And you become so motivated to present it as beautifully as you can for the director, and be like, here it is. And then you guys get to jam on it for a while and just be like, what if we took the music out here and then really boosted it here? Or what if we, just slide that sound over a little bit and add a wind gust right here just for drama, oh yeah, that's great. And you start like really getting into the minutia of it to elevate it. That stuff I just live for. And so, there's a kind of Zen thing to doing sound where you're really helping realize the vision of others. There's a service. Being at Sony was really good for me because it gave me a service-oriented attitude, which is that
you're bouncing from project to project.
Yeah, and I recently
Yeah.
worked on a movie called 9 Days as well, which is in theaters. It's Sony Pictures Classics, and that's a Sundance movie, director named Edson Oda, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, very moving movie. And this whole idea that Skywalker is doing, with the Sundance Institute and the Sundance Institute in general, just helping filmmakers find their voice, and then
Cool.
using Skywalker sound to augment that into something special.
That's
I feel
awesome.
like that's the gig. The gig is to take everything you have in terms of love in your heart and your skill and your education and your talent and whatever it is, and just throw it with reckless abandon at the screen or the speaker,
Right.
whatever,
Right.
and so, what do I know about Omega? Very little. What do I see in Omega as a Star Wars fan? Endless. And what I've tried to set up is that feeling that, there's like a natural kind of vibe that you get with the writer and the director of like, okay, this is probably where it's going to go. And hopefully that you're on the same page. Otherwise they would have replaced me, and you just bring all of that to the character. And I think that Omega is just, and Michelle, what's her last name?
Michelle Ang. Michelle Ang.
She's amazing. She's amazing. I've never met her, but she brings this huge depth of emotion to that character that is far beyond the years of the character. Anyway.
Totally.
I find that Michelle Ang is bringing so much opinion to every moment, and as an actor, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, she makes strong choices.
Right.
Yeah.
There's never a moment where Michelle Ang isn't really telling you what's going on with Omega. And what's wonderful about that is, much like Luke Skywalker before her, she's the point of view character. So if there's something going on around you, Michelle Ang gets to tell you how a child would feel about that in that situation. And I just think that is an amazing, wonderful thing for Star Wars. Is, you want your protagonists to be these wide-eyed lenses, vessel for what's happening around. And what I find so interesting about her character, what I love, in that finale, now that we're talking spoilers, she does, some people, if you get older, you get cynical and you go, oh, it's the hero does the right thing. You're like, you shouldn't be cynical about that. Yeah. It's important. It's important for young people to learn the lesson that it's not just about what's right for you. It's about what's right. That you should do what's right
in a pandemic, right?
Especially a pandemic. And that last moment, she does the right thing. And you go, well, yeah, but what's dramatic about that? Because everyone wants their Star Wars to be all dark. And it's like, yeah, what's dramatic about it is she's going to die. She decides to save AZ, played by the wonderful Ben Diskin. She decides to save the droid because this is like her friend, and it's a droid. In Star Wars, there's this weird, like, do droids even count? And she goes, no, they count. They count.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to dive in there to save my friend. She's going to die. There's no way out of it. She's not good enough to grab that droid and swim up to the surface. And that's not the point. She goes, no, I'm going to make the hard choice is to try to save the droid right now. And in a very hopeful Star Wars message that,
I'm getting chills remembering that right now, Sam. That's so good.
That moral decision, that moral decision becomes infectious, and even Crosshair gets in on the act and saves them both because she does that. That Crosshair has a moment where he redeems his prior behavior because she's made a very difficult decision. Star Wars has always been about, the selfless or the selfish, right? And I don't think anyone would have blamed her to stay in that pod and keep ascending as
there would have been no judgment.
No one would have blamed her because you're like, that's certain death. Yet what we learned about Omega is that's out of her head. She goes, no, the right thing is to go down in there. And you go, you're going to die. Be like, well, that's for the universe to decide. And the universe decides that it's like, no, because you made this sacrifice. And the bad guy, you saved him. You saved his life. Yeah. And the bad guy is going to go, bam, and save you. I mean, it's a very it was an incredible Star Wars moment. And it's an important thing for these young characters, Ahsoka Tano when she's young, Luke Skywalker, they put them in these situations where they're not easy decisions to make. It isn't simply you do the right thing because that's the right thing and we move on. No. huge consequences, and there's risk, and there's sometimes emotional injury in doing these things. But the hope is that those types of things spread, that they're infectious, that they catch on to the people around you. And that's the way the Force works. That's how it is. And I love these softer characters in Star Wars. I love Wicket. I love these younger characters. I love Omega, because if you don't have something soft and pure, or even cute, fuzzy, whatever, then I don't understand what the good guys are fighting for. I do not get what Star Wars is about if Star Wars doesn't get cute. If Jar Jar isn't kind of floppy and weird, then then Star Wars starts losing its
innocence.
shape. Because the older, more cynical people are like, well, listen, it's Star Wars is gonna be badass, and sometimes Star Wars is badass, but that's not what it's about. What it's about is,
look at Grogu. Oh my God, right?
Right.
Like the total distillation of that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's Star Wars is about hope. Star Wars is about having
I have
that.
an interesting. Yeah.
What's up?
I have an interesting story about Grogu. We did Loop Group on Mandalorian season 1, and there were just 4 or 5 of us. I mean, it was a really small crew at the time, because they didn't know it was going to be the hit that it was. And we knocked out all 8 episodes in a day. I mean, just by the end of the day, I was like, everything I was going Suka, to the Raiders, and speaking of Seven Samurai, the Raiders episode that Bryce Dallas Howard did to the end of the season with Stormtroopers, and every time Grogu was on screen, they had pixelated it out. And at the time, I remember thinking to myself, really? I mean, I'm working on this other Star Wars. What possibly is going to be there that you're trying to keep secret from us working on this?
So you guys didn't even know that it was a Baby Yoda creation when you were working on it?
Matt Wood did, of course. Dave Acorn did. I didn't. I was there. I think Gray Delisle was there. And we didn't know what it was. And at the time, I was just like, the culture of secrecy is just so fun. And we had seen it before on Force Awakens and a couple of other things.
Sure.
But then I saw Mandalorian after doing the Loop Group. They still withheld scenes from us. They did the same thing in the movies. They withheld certain scenes that didn't need us.
Sure.
And I was blown away by Grogu. I couldn't believe. And when he makes the decision, when he sees that the cap is missing from his lever, in the cockpit.
Yeah.
And he makes the decision to go back. I went, yeah! Like I was so ready to see that this whole season wasn't just going to be about,
kicking ass.
The man with no name going in and having a gunfight.
Yes.
It was going to be about challenging our place in the universe and having to understand ourselves through others, and that just, I think the heart of that is what makes that show so popular. So Star Wars is not just that the puppet is
so
amazing.
Good. Like it's so freakishly, like no way could we have anticipated how good this show is. I mean, you guys must feel this too. It's like, what if we had seen this when we were 13 or whatever, when
our mind,
it's so freaking good. And I think that there's beautiful connective tissue between Rogue One and its weird, crazy tangents, and the Mandalorian, and now the Bad Batch. There's
an interesting. But Star Wars, being, we talk about watching it when we're 12, watching it now, it's this generational thing. George Lucas has said it's for 12-year-olds, but it's also for large generations, because ultimately one of the huge hopeful messages in Star Wars isn't just, hey, you're a young person and you can grow into a good older person and you can become your own person. That's one of the messages. Another message is that the world beats you down. Anakin Skywalker. You become cynical, you become hardened, you become Mando. Mando was not a nice guy when we met him, and that if you actually start listening to yourself, if you crack that window open a little bit and start really listening to what the world is telling you, because the Sith, what they do, they block out the world.
Yeah.
Someone wants to tell me no, I can't hear the word no. This is my world, and I will now make the world around me the way I want it to be. But if you open up that window and you actually take in what the world is giving you, and you're honest with yourself, that one of the messages of Star Wars is that the older characters, despite even Luke Skywalker, when he becomes, whatever, he's like, however old he is when he fights Vader in Return of the Jedi, whether he's 25 or 30 or whatever, that the world is beating you up and trying to harden you. and you have an option, and the option is throw your lightsaber down and say, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. The option is to take baby Grogu and go, I'm going to blow my status with the Bounty Hunter Guild, and I'm going to be hunted and this and that, but this is the right thing to do, right? He saves himself. Grogu saves him in that moment, and he saves himself. Vader saves himself by helping Luke, that the world had beaten the hell out of Vader, turned him into a machine, and Vader finally at the last minute decided to make one right call, one good call, and be like, no, that's not the right thing to do. I'm going to do the right thing. And again, it's seeing Echo make a good move, do something really positive, because he saw, it was demonstrated for him by Omega. So it's not just a message about young people coming up. It's also about older people who've been beaten down a little bit, or, Luke Skywalker. The world is trying to turn you to the dark side at times.
Totally.
And
I love that with Mads Mikkelsen's scene as well in Rogue One, where he on the base where he gets killed. That just makes me emotional every time. And Jin rushes to him, and they have that cool moment. It's
who's been beat up, who's trying to pretty much she's trying to stay away from life because life has hurt her so badly. And then suddenly she goes on this mission where she's not coming back, and she's going to deliver these Death Star plans with the faintest bit of hope that someone can do something with them. Yeah. And she'll give her life for that mission. I mean, these are incredible, these are incredible stories about hopefulness for all ages, that no matter how old you are, no matter how much life has beaten you up, that there are options. You can choose to pry your window open, listen to the world, listen to the Force, and do something positive, do something right.
Do the right thing at the right moment. Hey, listen, guys, I don't want to end this. Like, I would just sit here and talk all day. You're so fun to talk with, and I knew this was going to happen. So how about we open our windows, to coin a phrase, to us reconnecting after Star Wars Visions, after we've seen those episodes.
Oh boy.
Does that sound cool? Yeah, me too. So they start in September, right? I don't even know the date. I mean, it just feels like every day I get something from Disney's coming out now every day. Disney Plus or Disney. Yeah. September 22nd. Okay. Yeah. So it'll be like 10 episodes or something like that, or
how many episodes are there? I believe there are 9 episodes. Yeah.
9 episodes. Okay. 9 episodes.
Yeah.
So I'll start bugging you guys in the fall. And then after Star Wars Visions it has wrapped up, let's please loop back and nerd out like this again. It's so much fun.
Sounds great.
Right on.
That sound cool? Yeah. Well, you guys are incredible. My guests today have been Sam Witwer and David Collins, and you should be as blown away by looking at their IMDb pages as I was today, because it's incredible. These guys have worked on so much stuff that we love, and it was a real treat to have you both here. Thank you so much, you guys. And thank you all for watching. We will see you soon. And until then, play forever.